year round with the support of sponsors, vendors, and thousands of volunteers to bring you the most exciting 2 weeks in Louisville that precede the most exciting 2 minutes in sports. Now, on what would have been Oaks Day and the close of the festival, he is leading the rescheduling of over 70 events that in the past would have been attended by more than 1.2 million. Matt, we're all pulling for you and look forward to learning more about how you came into the role as president and CEO of the festival and how you are leading us through this change and navigating what is an incredibly difficult period and unprecedented conditions. So we look forward to hearing from you this morning, and welcome to the Louisville Thought Leadership Series. Matt, it's all yours.
Thank you very much for that welcome, Jim, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning. Appreciate Aaron and Cynthia and Shelley and Holly working with me to bring this together. The extraordinary part is that one of the very interesting things I saw, or funny, thought-provoking things I saw on social media recently, was if you were to go and sit down with your 7-week future self about 7 weeks ago and someone try to explain to you where we are right now. There was no concept of what you can do, how to wrap your head around where we are. And I know that everybody who is watching this, regardless of the job that you're in, it is truly a suspension of belief where we are. The great thing about being in this role this year, taking over in the fall, in October 2nd was actually my first day. So I've been in the role for about 211 days. I'm a big counter. I always count down to what we do, whether it's the festival, whether it's how many days the past festival. So I've been in this role for about 211 days, and was in the role for about 156 when this hit. I've had 22 years here with the organization, and my background was really in operations, producing the product that we do, the 70 events that generates, a huge economic impact for this town. So it really became a part of who I am. I always say that it's a part of my makeup. We always say that you have to be a little sick to do what we do, and those that come back year after year, they definitely have the sickness. Looking through the list of folks that are on here, I see some of our very key volunteers, some of our board members, some partners that have worked with us for years and really supersede the amount of time I've got in the role. And I would say that they have the sickness too when I look through that list. So my background was in operations. I'm a big science of the crowd person. I love data. So, working through what we're experiencing right now with COVID and everything in this unique environment, data is really feeding what we're doing, and we spend a lot of time going into it, leading into this, looking at the data and how it was presenting itself and such. And as a science of the crowd person, really, I've always watched how crowds interact, how they respond to issues in the country, whether it be the Boston bombing, whether it be the Route 91 harvest issue in Vegas in 2017, and really responding to that type of stuff, whether it was industry influence for road races or event talent and production. There's always science behind it. I've done some disaster response. I did a couple tours responding to hurricanes, most recently Hurricane Irma, where I would go down and use the skills that I've learned in this industry to build forward bases for big light and power companies to help restore that. Taking, again, that science of the crowd and applying it to different things, really learning best practices and things that other industries are doing. And really evolving those skills to put our product into this growing community. I mean, when we talk about shoehorning this monster of a festival, one of the largest festivals on the continent, there really is a lot that goes into that. When you talk about Thunder all the way through the smaller events and keeping them all rolling at the same time, it takes what we call a very organized ballet to do that. one of the things that I really enjoy is one of the challenging parts, let's go back a little bit, is doing that in springtime because of the impact that weather, Ohio, talking about all of the challenges there. We never realized that pandemic would be part of that, or that we would have an opportunity to do it at a later time. But that's always one of the fun parts that we get to do when we put this together. One of the most valuable things that I've found in working in this job is all of the relationships that we have. With a 75-member board, 4,000 volunteers. Man, I know a lot of you or a few of you on the screen today or on the presentation today are, and I would encourage anybody who wants to get involved, just let us know. But we have 400 plus sponsors and 400 plus vendors. The relationship building has been one of my most favorite parts of this job, and what keeps me coming back year after year, and was one of the things that really turned me on about taking on this role. The organization decided a couple of years ago, when Mike Berry decided that he was going to retire, that they would do a nationwide search. And it was an exhaustive search. I believe at one point there were 300 plus candidates that were considered. And then it was about a year-long vetting process to go through it. And I had to do some real soul searching because I loved what I did for this organization. I've always said I've got the best job on the planet. If we're social media friends or you've heard me speak at different things, I believe that we have one of the best jobs out there. And there's a billion different reasons, and I could bore everybody with them. But as I started to look at what would appeal to me about being in this role, it was really about continuing what we do as an organization for this community. We are really born and bred in this organization. We've got a lot of peers in this community that come into the city and produce fantastic events and festivals and that, but we really have to live and reside and work here. We raise our children here. We have our businesses here. All of our partners work and make their living here. And we have a responsibility to this community. So as I started to evaluate what made me want to move into this role, it really was from a passionate space about what I love about this town. There's hardly a bigger fan, and I know that's a challenge to the couple hundred folks that are on this presentation, because you all love this community, especially if you've gone through the great programs at Leadership Louisville. It's about what we do for this town. But I always say that I'm probably one of the biggest fans of what we do in this community. So as I started to challenge myself about what I wanted to do in this role, or whether this would meet the needs that I have as a professional, I really started to evaluate what I would do with the organization and what I could contribute in addition to what past leadership had. I mean, Mike had a great run. Dan before him was a legend, and unfortunately he didn't get to finish everything he did because he passed away in office in 1996, I believe. And then Mike took over. And then what would I do to continue that legacy and make us valuable for another 64 years and beyond, really? That's kind of the task that the executive board and the selection committee really handed to me when they made the decision. And it was October 2nd that the announcement was made. So being in the role for 156 days when all of this hit, I had kind of come up with I jokingly say my 90-day plan at about day 105. It really started to materialize after sitting down and doing a full-on evaluation from a different perspective. You know, having been in the organization for 20 years, there was a full-on evaluation to do through a different lens and with a different set of eyes. And as I started really tapping into some of the folks who had been through the system in our leadership line, where we run them all the way up and through the chairmanship, and then we haven't made the best use, and we're working towards remedying that once they get out of that process. But really sitting down and looking through their eyes, what they would see and might do different, what one-on-one with every single staff member that I thought would take about 25 to 30 hours. It actually ended up taking about 60 plus hours to sit down and learn from the staff, because I needed to make sure I wasn't doing it just from my view, what they wanted to do here, what they wanted to see this organization that they've grown to love, because we have a very tenured staff, what they'd love to see it evolve to, and what they wanted to see it grow up, and what they wanted to grow up and be. And as I really started to pull all of that info together, a couple things really started to boil to the top. One of the great gifts that was given to me, and I look beyond my computer, is this image of the Pegasus Parade in one of its very first years, and it is going the wrong way down Broadway at night. And it was really apparent that a lot of people were mired in, were really adhered to the tradition of what we do. Sometimes, in some cases, mired in that tradition. And we get a lot of, and we've all heard this because it's in every leadership book that we look at, well, we've always done it that way. Well, we really started to identify that in our specific case, because we're annual, it happens every year in April with the exception of this asterisk year. Hopefully that's the only asterisk year. And we really had to be cognizant that if you're going to say we're always going to do it that way, that's why it was a gift from two very dear friends to put in my office as kind of a focal point. If you're going to say we've always done it this way, you better know how we've always done it. And so we really started to look back at why we were doing things and what we were doing and what needs we were meeting for the community, and started to determine that the tenets that I really wanted to attach to were evolution. We evolved from something. We sat down originally 64 years ago and made an argument for everything that we were doing. I wanted us to get back to that point, to sit down and make that argument for everything, not things that we were emotionally attached to or because we've always done them, but starting to really evaluate what this community needed and wanted. The other piece, I'm an eternal optimist. I always say that I'm on my island. It's a big island. Sometimes my boots get wet, but there's still a lot of room there. Even in this, I tend to be a realistic optimist. I mean, I know sometimes those are really conflicting points of view. But some of the Mattisms that the staff will quote me, one of the ones that I love the most is that we don't have problems until we're out of solutions. This is a perfect scenario where we are. We've got the benefit of time as we can discuss things, and I'll get into that in a minute. But it's the way you approach a lot of these things. So the second tenet was opportunity. As we sit down and start to go through our own existential flex about why we're doing these things, are we meeting the needs of the sponsors, the community, the goals inside the organization, even meeting our mission statement that we've evaluated over the last couple of years. Really finding the opportunity in new leadership, new thought processes, engaging all of the staff, the board, and then really the third one was partnerships. Again, I can't say that enough. I mean, even going into this new space for COVID and the challenges it presents, some of the partnerships are mind-blowing to us, where we are being welcomed into discussion about some new suspension of belief dialogues, and we'll get into that more because we have a long process of how we actually have to submit to local and state government about what we're doing. So while I can't give all the details, some of the partnerships I could kind of touch on a little bit later. But that was the third tenet of it. In all of this, the biggest thing and you might think that today would be our last production day. We kind of close it out at 2 a.m. tomorrow morning, going tonight into tomorrow morning, when we start to break down our big concert venue, Kroger's Festivale down on the waterfront, where typically, and the weather has been mostly great. I could probably rattle off every single day what we would have gotten off and what would have been fantastic. We've stayed in contact this week with the Churchill folks, and my heart goes out to them because a gorgeous day today and a gorgeous day tomorrow. A couple weeks ago on what would have been Thunder Day, that wail that you heard that sounded like a drone was actually me, because that was a gorgeous weather day too. And it was not unusual, but it certainly would have been a spectacular day for us. It's not lost on us that this would have been a great operational period. You might think that one of the heartbreaking things would have been losing the first festival that I would have led over. I believe some things happen for a reason, or a lot of things happen for a reason. I believe I was in the right space at the right time during this process, so I don't lament what my year has turned into. the biggest piece that I probably lament the most is that we as an organization had decided, and it was very important to me, that we were going to go through probably one of the biggest research projects that we'd ever done, talking about the existential flex and being willing to go in and have those uncomfortable conversations about the product that we're putting out there. And are we still attracting not only the people who have come for years, but the next generation and the generation after that? Are we creating that legacy that makes people want to come to our events? So we went through this very extensive vetting process and had zeroed in on Horizon Research, fantastic partners. And we were really getting into the point where we were determining where we were going to find not only the people who come, sorry, oh, hi, can you just let them know that I'll have to call them back? Yeah, I'll let them know. Sorry. We were not only, we know who comes. It's easy to talk to somebody who has a corn dog and a beer in their hand, and that's a happy person. You know, there's something fantastic about that, standing on Louisville's waterfront and boats are behind you, or jets are flying overhead, or, you know, there's fantastic music that you could get in with the price of a Pegasus pen night after night after night. And you can really find out the good about what's coming and who's coming and what's going on. What I wanted to find out is, you know, we've all read Jim Collins, and, you know, turning over the rock and seeing who's not coming, why they're not coming, and who we're not attracting, what's turning them off about coming. And, you know, that's the painful piece of it, when you have to sit down and you have to really look within and determine, you know, how do you change your programming, and how do you do the things that really will turn those folks on? Because you can look at trending and those types of things, but when you're looking at a true civic celebration, you really have to do, again, some existential flex. That's the biggest piece that I'll miss, is the data. It's funny because even going into, I would say, late March, our first executive board meeting after all of the COVID, and I'll go through our timing in that in a second, we really were still talking even into mid-March, because again, if we were to talk to our 7 weeks ago self, there's no way you could convince yourself that we would be living the life that we are right now, our new normal. We haven't even seen the normal yet. We were still talking about the potential for getting some form of data, even after we had been in a couple press conferences with local leaders and announced certain things, that we were going to kind of do our best to get that, because we were really holding on to the want of that. And again, that's the piece that I miss going into this year, because it might be a few years before we can get that logical data, because people are going to look at crowds differently. As a science of the crowd guy, the crowd will always regulate itself after big catastrophic things nationwide, or event-based issues that happen. Crowds will adjust. Doing this 22 years, I believe even before this type of incident, it was about probably 5 or 6 years ago, that we probably saw the last largest crowd that we would ever have for Thunder, meaning that you won't get to those in mass gatherings even before this. That constricting, very compact and very dense population of folks, where you would have 800,000 folks in one general event area like that, because people are starting to look at crowds. As a parent, you look at it different. As somebody who's very well tuned into what's happening in the country and the nation, on the globe, you start to look at events differently. And so anything moving forward, it will be a while before we have the data that would have met that need. Doesn't mean that, you know, looking at the evolution and opportunity, again, being an optimist, when all of this started to go down, again, I was in the role for about 150 days when we started to really look at this. We started to pull our COVID team, I think it was the third week of February. We had experienced, in my tenure here, a couple different issues. We'd gone through Hep A epidemic issues. We'd gone through a couple different things like that. And we had come into putting into play already for this year our epidemic plan, in order to address hand washing stations, ordered an insane amount of hand sanitizer that we've worked with local leaders to make sure they have access to, because we believe there's time, should we be able to produce our events, that we could build back up that stock. But we really started to look at this in mid February. You know, I go back to the argument that when I took over, and about, again, day 105 is when my 90-day plan really started to materialize. We wanted to sit down and make an argument for everything that we do. And then pow, you know, COVID hit, and guess what we're doing? You know, we're sitting down and we're really going through that evolution, figuring out the opportunity in it. And, you know, it's one of those things when you look back, you never know how things are going to play out, but, you know, it really does make us sit down and have an argument about what events make sense currently, because if we're able to do something in another 16, 17 weeks from now, which is the operational period that we're really looking at alongside Churchill Downs and the September 5th running of the Kentucky Derby, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Somebody was standing there again. I don't have
Hey,
little
Matt,
kids running it.
I also want to give you a quick check just to make sure you get through your slides.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's right. I do have slides, don't I?
Yeah.
Let's see. Really, it's the economic impact piece of it. The numbers, and that would have gone alongside. How am I doing on time, Cynthia?
So you have probably another 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'd love to get into questions.
Okay, great. So you can see kind of our overview of who we are by the numbers. These are conservative numbers that we have done from our last couple research projects, and it allows us to know our impact. As we start looking into what a post-COVID or a during COVID and the reversal of social distancing looks like, when we are having discussions with folks, what we need to make sure is that they are looking at it through a new lens, going back to the science of the crowd piece of it, where we know that, let's say Thunder, on average, it's been getting about 600,000 folks, which is nothing to sneeze at. There's no monies made in the difference of 600,000 or 800,000, because as you know, Thunder is a free event to the general public, and you know, we request that people have a Pegasus pin. The food sales and concession sales, you know, we'll sell those spaces because you can't depend on great weather one year and bad weather one year, so you basically sell it for rent, a rental space. And so it doesn't matter if 800,000 or 600,000 people come. You know, 600,000 is way more manageable than 800,000, and we've seen crowds as low as 300,000. When you apply the things that we do, whether it be a fashion show, whether it be Thunder over Louisville, the mini marathon, where we've had to get to in a new space while we're living through this, what we haven't even seen as normal, but the COVID issue, we're having conversations with folks about what the new lens of events and what the new lens of crowds look like. And what we know is that, let's say that we were able to get all of the events off, and the mayor's office said yes, and the governor's office and all of our partners could do it, and you could fit it in the spaces. We don't even have a concept yet of what a crowd looks like. We don't know who's going to be willing to come out. We don't know what the economic status of the people in this community is going to be, because we all know the catastrophic impact that's having to small businesses and organizations who didn't qualify for PPP, or these folks who are you know, sole providers, or they work in small companies like restaurants and hotels and those types of things. We don't have a concept yet of what that looks like. So what we're doing is really going back and doing a full-on analysis of what our events might look like. I'll kind of go back, touching base on our economic impact. This was one of the slides I really wanted to touch base on. The Derby Festival is a huge economic generator in this community. We have been for a long time. Our very first budget was about $600. It hangs in our main room downstairs. And obviously we've grown to something quite different from that. And that's a very conservative estimate, and the data is a few years old, because we take Wednesday and Thursday and Friday out of that mix, because we know that our friends over at Churchill really start to ramp up, and they have a huge economic impact too. So what we did was walk away from those numbers. So we know that those are conservative. We know right now, and one of the things that while we're having the conversation that we are about moving the events that we can and having that dialogue, is because while we know it won't be that impactful like it is there when we are operating on all cylinders and all previous things considered, but we do know that we can have some type of impact on the community that can get people moving. Hotels are going to be important. Restaurants are going to be important. Right now, as an organization, even though we've been kind of suspended everything that we know, it's been such a surreal thing for us as an organization, just like everybody. But today, again, should be our last day of operation, and we should have, the 65th Derby Festival under our belts, and we're putting it back in the box over the weekend and over next week, and making sure that it never looks like we were here. Repairing everything that we broke, finding everything that we lost, returning everything that we borrowed, all of those things that we do, but we're not. So when the COVID hit, the very first thing that we started to do was, one, start to talk about our March events. I mean, I could go in a whole timeline, but I think I'll run out of time if I do that. It was around the 13th when we met with, after having a series of press conferences with the mayor's office, and probably got, I think, our first conversation with the governor's office on the 11th of March about what we should really be considering. And we were even talking about what steps we might take, an argument we might make for having a Thunder with a reduced crowd, and that even as late as the 11th through the 13th. It was around the 13th that we decided, okay, all bets are off. We've gone into a state of emergency, and we went into a very extended session over the weekend of the 13th, 14th, and 15th, and really started to look at a full suspension of the operations of the organization as we know it. It was probably one of the most difficult conversations, and I know a lot of people on this call have experienced that in this last 50 days, because we've always been asked if certain things could be suspended. And the answer is that Thunder in a normal scenario could not be suspended. You don't have the hotel real estate, you don't have the waterfront real estate because other things are happening, and you just don't. When you're talking about a full suspension of everything we know is normal, you can certainly have that conversation. We were on the phone that whole weekend with our friends at Churchill, trying to coordinate some kind of at least complementary schedule that might make sense, talking about different windows in those, having conversations with the U.S. military, and all of those things that you can do, Zambelli and all of those folks, to see if that we can move it. And then I think it was into that week of the 16th that we started to make those announcements. While testing was so low at that time, and the folks here had been triaged up, we believe that we've had 4 folks who have actually fallen ill with COVID, including myself. We were triaged through, given all of the antibiotics and those, and went through quarantine. But as you know, in those the early weeks of March, we just didn't have the testing, and nor would it have affected the scenarios. I don't know how many folks here have either been impacted, have had it, or had somebody close to them, but it hit us all very, very differently. And that hit us very strangely, because some people in very key roles went down while we were in the middle of moving the festival and everything that we know. Where we are now, and what we call the 2020 attempt, for the last month and 2.5 weeks, because we're hitting the 50-day mark today that we've been in the restricted or the social distancing scenario, we've started to create what we would consider a very robust calendar. The first steps that we did was look to see what all competition was out there, and I keep looking to my right because my office has become this war room. I'm the only person who comes in right now. and it's more so because my wife works at home, and you can't have two very big personalities in the same house working only one floor away. So I come in, and we started to really identify everything that was out there. We know that the calendar in September has changed greatly. We all know of lots of cancellations. We know there are probably going to be more that come along for some of these smaller events. We hate to see that. That's some of the partnerships we have been working on and discussing, because we want to make sure that other people who are trying to do good for the community and create quality programming aren't being overrun by us, and there are partnerships that can be created. It's our belief right now that the data is going to tell a story. The first week, the week of the 16th was when we identified May 18th as kind of the 10-week mark, where we would really start to sit back and look at what either flattening the curve, what the reversal of any kind of social distancing would look like. And we are still kind of waiting to get into that period. We know that there is a lot of speculation that's happening in September, and we've heard everything. We've heard all of it, just as everybody has. But we operate, and again, sometimes it's my optimism that allows us to have some of these conversations, and sometimes to a fault. I'll be the first to admit it. We still have about 18 weeks before, let's call it the new Derby in September, on September 5th. And a lot can happen data-wise in 18 weeks. So where we are looking into the 10-week mark, which puts us at May 18th, that gives us a couple weeks as we start to fill out what I would say is kind of a questionnaire. There's some basic questions that the governor's office asks you to answer, and our local partners in the mayor's office, where we're working with them in tandem in these discussions from an a cautiously optimistic perspective, knowing that the community is going to likely need something when we all get out of this. We are great in that perspective because we offer, high quality, low cost entertainment. Oftentimes it's free, and that's going to be our goal too. We've got great partners who are standing with us. Cynthia was talking about their partners in Baird. We cannot say enough about our sponsors and those folks that work alongside us. The support has been resounding when we are having a conversation about suspension of belief, about let's forget what they looked like before. Let's forget the timing of one event happening before another, or one being the opening and one being the closing. And having discussion about not only what the original goals a sponsor may have brought to us that they wanted us to help them accomplish, but what new goals are as it relates to giving something back to the community, having something to celebrate as we all come through something like this. There's been a couple dates that we've released. Obviously, the tentative date for Thunder is April 15th. The mini marathon obviously has been spent, and I don't know if many people heard at the beginning, I'm actually trying to accomplish our virtual marathon, right, or half marathon, let me clarify, 13.1. I am not a runner by any means, but I'm going to try to attempt it in that short time frame. To do what we're asking others to do. And then we're creating space and new ideas for about 20 other of our events, and trying to figure out right now over the next 3 weeks what new best practices exist. The basic definition of a best practice is what somebody's put into play and they've figured out, and now they're going to share with the world. Everything that we're doing from all of our industry partners is all speculation based on what new best practices are. I don't know if many of you all have seen it, but Kroger released their Kroger Blueprint on Google. If you actually Google that, they have got some great information out there about what they know as best practices for social distancing, how people gather. Obviously, they're doing it at a different space, but they have shared that with the world basically and really unveiled their plan. And it's one of the best resources that we've seen for allowing folks to do some research based on the things that they tried that didn't work and the things that they're doing that are working when you're regrouping and bringing people back together.
So Matt, I want to make sure, we've already got a couple questions jumping in. Okay. I want to make sure that we get an opportunity to have a few folks. I know I've got one from Ed Evans who wants to know your tips. Right now, your team had to have had a kind of that demoralizing, so what are your tips for how do you motivate in the midst of all that?
One of the things that we work on constantly is right before this, we had been exploring how to create a more flexible workspace. So we didn't get blindsided by all of this remote work. Let me tell you, we got 98% blindsided. Where what we immediately did was determine, yes, we are going to do it a little differently and start to look at how we move it forward and put the cancellation discussion behind tempered glass with a very heavy hammer that we would swing at the very end once we were out of all options. And convincing the folks that we weren't going to know of the extent of the issues we were facing for a while. So what we really wanted to do was focus their attention, because mind you, again, we were 38 days out of our operational period. We still had some March events, but we were 38 days to thunder. And if you've never been in our office around that time, I know every company out there has that kind of focus time period, whether you're a CPA or whether you're the Leadership Louisville folks and you're really focusing on one of your main products. The buzz in this office during that March, April, and May time is just, it's measurable. You could feel it. And you could see them fall, and you could see them fall drastically. So what we wanted to do immediately was give them a new focus to really put their teeth into, wrap their arms around, and give them things to start doing themselves so that they could be impactful to what we're doing and have something to do. One of the things that I'm real big on is making sure that their video cameras are on so that they are engaged when we're having our staff meetings. I don't have complete success because I believe in making sure that we support the staff, and it always bugs me when somebody gets embarrassed because their child comes running in. That's the new world that we live in. And I encourage them to be there because as a social person, as a people person, I'm missing those social cues that happen. And it's something to be able to see, whether it's myself as a leader or my leadership team, to be able to see that somebody might be in a struggling space and to see those social cues. And we're constantly having the discussions about, we all know what the what if is. We know that there's a very good chance or whatever the data is going to tell us, that it may not go off as we know it. But we also know that there is a chance, and while there is still a chance, we don't have a problem until we're out of solutions. So I think to answer his question is making sure that you could see them and you're engaging them. We have to learn the new cues that people are giving, and I encourage them all to you can have a large staff meeting where somebody never talks the entire staff meeting or any of those. You have to get them to engage so that you can find those new cues, because we're not seeing the social cues piece of it. And we have constant meetings, whether there's staff meetings or team meetings and work group meetings.
So our next question is about the state fair. And actually we got a couple people who want to know how you are coordinating, collaborating with State Fair. And I'll tell all the other folks too, go ahead and populate your questions in the chat, and we'll try to work.
That is one of the fun things to be able to be discussing. David Beck and his crew out there, they are fantastic. David Beck has been there for a few years, and he is a leader that I've had lots of discussion with even prior to this, because he's got great ideas and he's got that kind of suspension of belief, what can we do for this community that we reside in and support? And we were very cautious, whether it was the small local events or even the big ones like the music festivals, the Tri-Fest music festivals that we hated to see go away, and the state fair, of making sure that because we compete oftentimes for a lot of the same crowd, we try to create economic generating quality, low-cost entertainment, so we're right in the same space. He was very quick to get to where we were as well, that what as crowds, even on the best weather scenarios and all things considered, are going to be different. And knowing that there are things that we can do to combine efforts in order to meet the same goals. And there's some really neat things on the horizon that we'll be releasing soon that we're working in conjunction to make sure that we're not coming in and robbing from their crowd. Well, the goals and things that we're going to attempt will benefit both organizations. so that it meets their goals and they don't feel the impact from us operating at the same time, in addition to what they would feel based on the COVID impact as well. So that's one of the greatest things and really good motivators is these partnerships, including with the huge entity like the Kentucky State Fair and all that it brings, because they can match those crowds like we do for our 600,000 square foot venue. So fantastic partnerships with people like that.
So you're getting some love in the chat box. Lots of folks want to give you a shout out.
Well, thank you.
And Roy Potts wants to know, what was the biggest challenge for you in transitioning into CEO? I mean, I think the question, like outside of, pandemic, just in terms of your leadership, how do you transition to CEO? What was your biggest challenge?
One of the biggest challenges is I didn't have I had a behind the scenes role, but I had a very large role previously for the last number of years as the Senior Vice President of Events and Operations. I had an impactful role that was executing what it was that we do. And one of the challenges was people really did see a challenge, saw it as being a challenge of me being able to transition from that role to this role. I will tell you, there were big shoes to fill for Mike Berry. He was here for 33 years. He did a fantastic job. He is a great speaker. He is passionate about what we do. Obviously, with the continuation of his career, it surprised me. He kept telling us he was going to retire, and I think he made it 30 days before he, went into state government. So he has a passion for this community, and he had big shoes to fill. I could look around, and his impact is everywhere. So I would say that the biggest challenges were being able to convince folks that we could get people up to speed to be in the role that I was previously, and that I would transition fast and effectively into this one. I still don't know what a festival will look like for me. That was going to be one of the things I was going to learn the most, is what festival looked like for me, because my festival is different than Mike's for the last 22 years that I've been employed here, and it worked great. And I had to find out what I wanted out of festival, and I still won't know for another year at least. And so that would have been, those were the two bigger challenges, the transition piece and then filling the big shoes that Mike Berry left too.
So Ed Fallon wants to know, what talents and treasures are you looking for in your board members? Great question.
Some people, when we talk in our industry about our board of directors, we have 75 board members, and oftentimes I see people's jaw drop if they have a board. There's been argument made since in my 22 years that we would reduce the size of that. I would stand in front of that bus in a heartbeat, because I saw one of the folks on the phone call, Marita Willis, and I were talking, the days are blending. It could have been a couple days ago, could have been a week ago, about the value of our board and the value of those who make their way through our board. We were talking about time, talent, and treasure. And when you're an organization like us that activates like we do for the month of April and really get to a point where it is all hands on deck, and there's no way 23 people could execute this, and you have this extension of the staff and the mentality and the people with what I call the sickness that come in and they love it as much as you do. To apply one set of values to a board member, I think would do it a little bit of injustice, because with few exception, they are all engaged. They all are passionate about it. They either represent large companies or they work their way onto our board. But it is what I would say, the number one thing is those who love this community, whether they're transplants or they were born and bred here like I was. They come in and they get associated with us because you could do it for 1 year and walk away. I mean, we see that quite often. But what you really see is those really valuable folks are those that come in, and I get paid to stand in the rain and the muck and deal with a rising river and locusts and falling and pandemic and those things. These people do it because they love it, and it is a passion that they bring that is unmatched. I mean, I would put those folks up against any board because they love it, and they do it just like the folks who come here and our tenured staff. I can't say enough about our board of directors.
One more quick one.
Yeah.
What's KDF's decision-making process in times of uncertainty? Are you all intuitive? Do you have a big map out system? Is there a link you can provide us that gives us a fantastic resource? What do you all do? Make a ton of decisions lately.
One of the things that I've always said is that my phone doesn't ring unless there's a problem, and my phone is always ringing. And it really has been an attitude base. And again, I don't make the joke lightly about the river rising or the sky falling or, those types of things. When you're in the high risk scenarios that we are, where you're running one of the nation's largest air shows in the middle of a metropolis and on a two-state line, and the challenges that it presents in putting an air show space, there isn't one way that we address problems. We have extensive emergency action plans and different protocols that we roll into place for certain scenarios. But this kind of goes back to the board. We've all heard that analogy that you don't have to be an expert if you surround yourself with those who are on a certain subject. And the fantastic thing, and I've always been one that believes in the larger group, the better. I always say 2 heads are better than 1 and 6 or more are unstoppable. And whenever we run into any kind of challenge, we are very quick to expand the group and dialogue so that you're not getting the emotional response, you're not getting the type of scenario that somebody might be applying it to what their to-do list is. When you start to expand that group, that's when you start to get great perspective. Some of the folks on this call today can testify that I will call somebody in a heartbeat and start to expand in a dialogue, and until we get to a point where you really get consensus, maybe isn't the right word, but the information starts to boil to the top because it starts to become the logical decision and pathways. And what I would encourage folks is, one of my sales staff says it a lot, and I always have to remind myself, never lose alone. It's not only a sales approach, it's a leadership approach. It's not, you should never carry it until it takes you down. Expanding that group, going to those people that you trust, and having an advisory group. I mean, there are some folks on this that could pinpoint themselves as people I call when I have a question. And expanding that group, no matter what the scenario challenge is, so that you get more feedback and input.
I love that. Never lose alone. Always bring your yes. Yeah. So we're gonna let folks go, but in parting words of wisdom, this is shameless self-promotion. Leadership Louisville applications are open right now. So Matt, you can attest. Should the folks on the call, should they apply? Should they forward the email to their friends and say, you should apply? What do you think? What's your advice?
I tell you, I've gone through a lot of different programs. I've had a lot of different experience in my life. And I will tell you, one of the number one experiences that I had, even as what I would call a great Louisvillian, and knowing what I know about this community, the exposure that it gave me to this town and the input and the thought that they put into every bit of programming, and they don't just roll it out and it's a year. They respond to what is relevant. They respond to what the groups talk about. It doesn't matter what the program it is. I can't say enough about the Leadership Louisville. I can't say enough about the class of 2018, best class ever. I know every class says that, but I can't say enough about the product that they create. And it's this group that you guys can't see them, but it's this group that I see on my tower on the right that they just, it's incredible. Aaron and Cynthia and Holly and all of them, I mean, they put so much thought into it, and it is an ever-evolving product that is a jewel for this community.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I did not pay for that advertisement, but I did kind of set up the softball. So thank you all for hanging out with us this morning. Hopefully you'll have your friends and you will check out our micro-learning. It's a great way for us to expand the reach of the center and make it accessible for all. They're free and they're so valuable right now. Check out our next Thought Leadership series and all the other great things we have going on at the Leadership Louisville Center. I want to thank Baird, and I want to thank the team at Leadership Louisville Center, especially Holly Prather, who's been our curator and brings us really interesting people. So she's doing a great job, and I want to thank all the folks, all our partners, and we're wishing everyone a happy Underby weekend, and yes, that you all have a chance to celebrate in some way. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.